Hello, and welcome to your CNET 204 Week 4 lecture video. This week, we're going to learn about Git, GitHub, and HTML5, an introduction to all three. So we're going to look at what is Git and what is GitHub. We're going to look at Visual Studio Code. That's our text editor that we're going to be using to write the code to develop our website. And we're going to look at HTML5, and in the lab this week you're actually going to set up all these development tools, Git and GitHub and VS Code, or Visual Studio Code as it's commonly referred to as VS Code. And you're going to write a very basic web page using HTML5. Next week we're going to layer on some styling with CSS3. And at the end of this, you're actually going to import your index page that you've created locally using Visual Studio Code. Well, we'll talk about where you're actually creating that, but you're going to push it into GitHub, and then you're going to import it into your web server that you created last week. So if you didn't do last week's lab, you should go back and do that, because like I mentioned at the start of this course, every lab builds on the previous one. So where do we begin? We begin with, what is Git? Git is free and open source. It's a distributed version control system designed to handle everything, from small to very large projects, quickly and efficiently. It's easy to learn. It's got a small footprint. It's very fast performance. It's much better than any other version control software out there, and it's very commonly used. And a cool thing about Visual Studio Code, it was created in 2005 by Linus Torvalds. We know who he is. That's the guy who created Linux. It's interesting. It's maintained by Junio Hamano, who was a major contributor on the project. Basically, when Linus got everything to where he wanted it, he passed it over to Junio to maintain, because he's focused on maintaining the Linux kernel, and that's a lot of stuff. Now what Git does is once you initialize it on files or on a directory, it will track the changes that are made to those files and allow you to revert to earlier versions, which is really, really cool. It's extremely popular. It's used by many companies and many organizations, and it's a good thing to use. And it's built right into Visual Studio Code, so that's why I put it in here. It's great. Now GitHub is an internet hosting service for software development and version control. And look at that, it uses Git. It's kind of in the name, right? GitHub. So it provides the distributed version control of Git, plus access control, bug tracking, software feature requests, task management, continuous integration, and wikis for every single project. It's headquartered in California, and it's actually been a subsidiary of Microsoft since 2018, when Microsoft bought them. It's very popular. It has over 100 million developers and over 372 million repositories, including at least 28 million public repositories. And we're going to be using it in this course because I'm teaching you to work with current modern tools. And that's why we did all the cloud stuff that we did, and we built our own platform that we're going to use to host our website. Which of course now we have to kind of build the development environment. So it's just installing a few things. It's not too difficult. Now Visual Studio Code, or VS Code, is a very powerful, very cool source code editor. And yet again, it was created by Microsoft. It's kind of weird. It's been available since 2015. It's become increasingly popular ever since. I've actually had people been telling me for years, you should go check out Visual Studio Code. I used to use Notepad++ for everything. And then I checked out Visual Studio Code and I went, holy crap, this is amazing. I need to put this in my web design course. So, hey, guess what? Uh, so some of the nice things about Visual Studio Code, it's free. I mentioned at the start of the course, everything we use in this course is free. It's open source, an open source product from Microsoft. What? Microsoft isn't what it used to be. They've really embraced open source in the last several years, and they're doing some awesome things with it. And it's available cross-platform. So it works in Mac OS, it works in Linux, it works in Windows. I use it on my Linux desktop. I'm going to be showing it to you in my Windows 10 virtual machine again, so I can kind of emulate your environment a little bit. But it's awesome. And it has Git support built right in. It's really easy to use. It's extremely customizable. And if you don't want to use it on your desktop, you don't want to install it, you can use it through GitHub using GitHub Codespaces, which we've got free access to using GitHub Classroom in this course. So I'm going to show you how to use that, but I'm also going to show you how to install it. This is going to be our text editor for developing a website using HTML5 and CSS3 and PHP towards the end. A little bit of PHP in there. The GitHub Codespaces is awesome. I'm going to show you how to install Visual Studio Code quickly. It's not that hard to install, to be honest. But the cool thing about Codespaces through GitHub and GitHub Classroom is you can code from your phone or from any device that has an internet connection from anywhere. If you want to work on an assignment on the bus on your way home, I'm not saying it's going to be the most ideal environment to work in, but I've actually done that. I've updated code on the lab site from my phone on the TTC coming home from the college. It's insane. It's just insane. Really awesome. So in the first, I was going to say the first half. It's not really the first half. We've already done 3 labs. In labs 4 through 9, we're going to be learning HTML, HTML5, sort of, and CSS3. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's one of the 2 basic languages used for front-end web development. I guess JavaScript could be thrown in there as well, and that would make it 3, but HTML and CSS are really the foundation for everything. Now, HTML5 is the most recent and final version of HTML. It was developed by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and released in 2008. But it's been maintained by the WG, Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group since 2019. And that's an organization made up of members from Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Mozilla. So, you know, the makers of all the major browsers. So HTML5 isn't necessarily really the most accurate term for the language anymore. And there's some debate on this. But it was designed to be updated as needed. It's more accurately referred to as a living standard now. And I think WhatWG refers to it as the HTML living standard, which, I don't know, HTML5 just seems more sensible to me. HTML is used for structuring your document or web page. As you refer to it, we tend to refer to them as documents. CSS is used to apply styles, like changing the color and positioning elements and stuff like that. You're going to learn an introduction to CSS3 next week. And I know that seems kind of crazy. 5 weeks into the course, you're still getting introduction content, but it's building to something. It's building to something awesome, honestly. Now, HTML documents are made up of 3 important parts. The very first line of your document is the doc type declaration. That tells the browser what version of the language you're using and how it should interpret the code. The document itself is then split up between the head and the body. The head contains information about the page and links to external resources such as CSS or JavaScript, or it could even have embedded CSS or JavaScript. Nothing in the head actually shows up in the web page, except for the title tag. It's the one thing that shows up in your browser somewhere. The body contains everything else you see on the page. Literally all of your content is in the body. Now, I mentioned a few times that everything is free and there is no textbook, which might make you question, well, what do we do if we need some resources for things? You can use w3schools.com. In fact, I think I embedded a link for W3 Schools in the AWS lab at the very start, because they've got some stuff for AWS, which is pretty awesome too. But they're also an amazing resource for HTML and CSS, and it's free. And I like free, right? They also have some additional tools, such as HTML and CSS validators. And that can be one of the frustrating things with more so with CSS. If you're trying to do something and the code's wrong, it's not going to throw you an error or anything in the browser. It's just not going to work. So you throw it through one of the validation tools. If it's CSS, through the CSS validation tool. If it's HTML, through the HTML validation tool. And it'll tell you if there's any errors and give you an idea on how to fix them. It's pretty great. We're going to use W3 Schools for all the supporting documentation, so in place of a textbook, because it's free and on the internet. And we're going to be using their validators. All of your code, before it's submitted in its final form, you should run through the validator and it should pass, because that means that everything is accurate and up to date. So in Lab 4, we're going to do a lot of stuff. We're going to configure our development environment. So we're going to set up Git, access GitHub, create a GitHub account, set up Visual Studio Code, and then we're going to look at the the basic elements, the web page, or a web page. We're going to create a very simple web page, post it to GitHub, and then pull it in from GitHub to our server and access it using a browser running on our Apache server that we built last week. Next week in Lab 5, you're going to learn how to stylize your page with CSS3. And I should mention, Lab 5 is the halfway point for the lab content, because there's only 10 labs. We're getting pretty deep in, and we're only 4 weeks into the course. With all that in mind, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video where I do a demo of Lab 4. Take care, be safe, have a great day, week, whatever. Bye for now.